the Kelvar research vessel touched down on the lifeless surface of Earth. Another dead world in a long list of failed civilizations. The scientists stepped out onto cracked pavement, their sleek metallic suits standing in stark contrast to the decayed ruins that stretched around them. Towering buildings, once a sign of human ambition, now stood hollow and broken. Streets were filled with rusted vehicles, their frames half buried in layers of dust. Vegetation had pushed through the cracks in concrete, reclaiming what had been lost. The Kelvar were an advanced species, masters of planetary engineering and interstellar travel. They had studied hundreds of extinct civilizations, many far more advanced than humanity had ever been. To them, this place was nothing special. Their scanners swept the ruins, analyzing every inch of the crumbling structures. The buildings were constructed from crude materials: concrete, glass, steel, nothing like the self-repairing biometallic compounds the Kelvar used. The power grids were archaic, relying on physical wiring instead of quantum energy transfer. The vehicles were primitive, their combustion engines a sign of an undeveloped society. The scientists recorded their findings, noting the inefficiency of human technology. They speculated that the civilization had fallen due to its own limitations, perhaps a failure to sustain itself, or internal conflicts that led to its collapse. There was no evidence of planetary devastation, no signs of nuclear war or asteroid impact. Humanity had simply vanished, leaving behind the remains of a world that had outlived them. As they moved deeper into the city, they detected a large underground structure beneath the ruins. It was buried under layers of debris, but the entrance was still intact. Unlike the decayed buildings above, this facility had been built differently, stronger. It had survived time better than the rest of the world. The Kelvar excavated the entrance and forced their way inside. The air was still and thick with dust. The walls were lined with dormant machinery, their surfaces covered in layers of grime. There were massive rows of what looked like storage units, and an intricate network of cables that stretched into the darkness. There was no energy signature, no activity. Whatever this place had once been, it had long since shut down. Their scanners picked up a control panel near the center of the chamber. It was an old system, relying on physical buttons and switches instead of neural interfaces. The Kelvar found it amusing, an outdated relic from a species that had never achieved true technological mastery. One of the scientists activated an energy transfer device, sending a pulse of power into the system to extract whatever data remained. The ground trembled. A deep, mechanical hum echoed through the facility. Dust shook from the ceiling. The cables that had been lifeless a moment before now pulsed with energy. Machines whirred to life, their ancient circuits reigniting after centuries of dormancy. Then, the lights came on. First, a few flickers. Then, the entire underground complex was bathed in a cold, artificial glow. Monitors activated, displaying unreadable symbols. Gears turned, engines rumbled. Systems that had been sleeping for ages were now awake. Above ground, the changes spread. Streetlights flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows across the ruins. Billboards, dark for centuries, lit up with static-filled images. Buildings that had been dead and silent now glowed from within. Power grids reconnected. Electrical currents surged through the city. The Kelvar scrambled to understand what was happening. Their instruments detected massive energy spikes across the planet. Satellites, thought to be lifeless debris, adjusted their positions. Deep beneath the surface, unknown mechanisms activated, running calculations, sending signals. This was not a dead world. The humans had not left behind a ruin, they had left behind a system. Something had been waiting. The Kelvar had assumed Earth was just another failure, a civilization that had crumbled under its own weight. But they had been wrong. The humans had built something designed to endure long after they were gone. And now, it was awake. They had made a mistake. They had assumed they were the observers, the ones studying a long-dead species. But the moment they had restored power, the system had started analyzing them. Across the city, cameras turned, sensors adjusted, data was gathered. The network had recognized something new. It had recognized them. And now, it was responding. The research team from the Vectras Dominion arrived on Earth with little more than curiosity and condescension. Their mission was simple: survey the remains of a long-extinct civilization and catalog whatever scraps of knowledge might still exist. They had done this before, traveling from one dead world to another, collecting data on civilizations that had risen and fallen long before the Dominion's own ascent. To them, Earth was just another corpse in the endless graveyard of the universe. They landed in what was once called North America, in the heart of what the humans had labeled a megacity. Towering structures of steel and glass jutted toward the sky, their forms softened by centuries of decay. Vines and moss crept up the sides of abandoned skyscrapers, their roots winding through cracks in the pavement. Rusted vehicles, their once sleek designs now corroded by time, lay scattered in the streets, half buried in layers of dust and debris. The air smelled of damp stone and old metal, lifeless yet oddly preserved. The team of xenologists, engineers, and archivists spread out, scanning and recording. They examined the architecture, noting its crude construction methods. They analyzed the materials, unimpressed by the simple alloys and composites used. The scientists scoffed at the remnants of human technology, finding it primitive compared to the advanced computational matrices and synthetic matter they were accustomed to. One of the researchers, a senior xenoarchivist named Ska, dismissed the ruins as unremarkable. He documented the power systems with little enthusiasm, assuming them to be little more than inefficient energy grids that had long since run dry. Typical of lesser species, he thought. Their energy sources had been finite, their infrastructure weak. Even their so-called supercomputers would have been outdated by Dominion standards thousands of years before the first Vectratsi starships took flight. Yet, as they probed deeper into the ruins, a troubling pattern emerged. Unlike other dead civilizations they had studied, the humans had not simply vanished due to war or environmental collapse. There were no signs of a final battle, no widespread destruction beyond what time itself had inflicted. It was as if they had simply stopped existing, their cities left behind like abandoned shells. The research team soon located what appeared to be a central control facility, an underground complex beneath the ruins of a towering structure. Its entrance was buried under rubble, but once inside, they found a vast network of corridors and chambers, all lined with dormant machinery. There were massive cylindrical generators, walls filled with inactive displays, and vast halls where thousands could have once gathered. They detected power lines still intact beneath the floors, and to their surprise, small energy readings flickered on their instruments. It was impossible. These readings should have been non-existent. A world abandoned for millennia should not have functioning systems. Yet here they were. Ska and his team dismissed it as a malfunction in their instruments. But as they continued, the readings grew stronger. They found a central terminal, covered in dust but structurally sound. The researchers assumed it was nothing more than a remnant of outdated computational hardware. Still, they attempted to interface with it, using their own equipment to force an energy surge through the ancient circuits. Then, without warning, the room trembled. A low hum filled the air, reverberating through the walls like the slow awakening of something vast and unseen. The researchers froze as deep beneath them, something shifted. One by one, The ancient systems, thought long dead, flickered to life. Across the ruined city, lights began to turn on. At first, only a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Street lamps, neon signs, interior panels, entire buildings lit up as if Earth itself had simply been waiting for a reason to wake up. The researchers stood in stunned silence as the full scope of what they had done became clear. And then, the screens activated. All around them, displays long dormant now glowed with data. Strange symbols and numbers scrolled across them in patterns the aliens could not immediately decipher. Recorded voices echoed through the facility, human voices, preserved in digital form. Security systems booted up, scanning the intruders with cold efficiency. The Dominion scientists scrambled to shut down the systems, but it was too late. The city was awake, and it was responding to them. Ancient satellites in orbit, still operational, began transmitting signals. Power grids realigned. Machines that had once served the long-gone human population resumed their function, as if no time had passed at all. And then the realization hit them: this was not just a ruin. It had never been a ruin. The humans had not simply died out or faded into history. They had built something beyond the understanding of the Dominion. This was not the wreckage of a lost species. It was a system, an active, waiting system designed to remain dormant until it was needed. And the aliens, in their arrogance, had triggered it. Yurixka's mind reeled as he processed what this meant. The humans had not merely existed, they had prepared. Their technology was not crude, it was different, structured in ways the Dominion had not recognized. And worst of all, if the power was still on, then perhaps something else was too. The realization sent waves of unease through the research team. They had come to study a dead civilization. But what if it was not dead at all? What if it had merely been waiting for the right moment to return? The lights in the city continued to blaze, brighter and brighter, as if announcing something the aliens could not yet understand. And far above them, in the darkness of space, something unseen stirred. The alien research team landed on the dead world without excitement. To them, this was routine. The Kelvar Dominion had expanded across hundreds of systems, finding and cataloging the remains of extinct civilizations. Earth was just another addition to their records, another world that had failed to survive the test of time. The planet had been dead for centuries, maybe longer. The air was still breathable, but heavy with dust. Great cities stretched across the landscape, their buildings worn down by wind and time. Towers once built to scrape the sky now stood as jagged ruins, their glass windows shattered, their steel frames rusting under the weight of abandonment. As the team moved through the empty streets, their instruments scanned the environment, logging data. The architecture was primitive. The materials used for construction were basic: concrete, steel, glass. There were no signs of advanced energy manipulation, no evidence of matter synthesis. The humans had relied on crude machines, dependent on physical fuel and wires, unlike the self-sustaining energy fields the Kelvar had perfected. The team leader noted in their report, this species lacked long-term survival capabilities. Their infrastructure was fragile, their technology outdated even before their extinction. They pushed further into the ruins. Vehicles lay abandoned, half buried under layers of dust and debris. The roads were cracked and broken. Nature had begun reclaiming the land. Trees had forced their way through concrete. Vines had wrapped themselves around the skeletal remains of human industry. To the aliens, it was just further proof of how weak this civilization had been. But something was strange. Most civilizations that had collapsed left behind clear reasons for their downfall: wars, environmental disasters, planetary catastrophes. But here, there was no sign of a great war, no impact craters, no radiation spikes, no evidence of biological plague. The buildings had not been bombed or burned, they had simply been abandoned. It was as if humanity had just left. Their scans picked up an underground structure beneath one of the largest buildings. It was buried beneath layers of debris, but the entrance was intact. It took time to clear a path, but eventually, they found themselves standing before a thick metal door. Unlike the rest of the ruins, this door had not rusted. It had been built differently, stronger, as if it was meant to last. They forced it open and descended into the darkness below. The underground facility was vast. The walls were lined with dormant machines, silent and still, their purpose unknown. There were rows of what looked like data storage units, though the aliens doubted any usable information remained after all this time. More scanning revealed power lines running through the floors and walls, but their instruments detected no energy flow. Like the rest of the planet, it was dead. One of the scientists accessed what looked like a control panel, brushing away layers of dust. The interface was primitive, relying on physical buttons and switches instead of the neural-linked interfaces the Dominion used. They connected a power supply from their equipment, hoping to extract some data. That was when everything changed. A deep hum resonated through the chamber, faint at first, then growing stronger. Vibrations rippled through the floor. The walls trembled as if something massive had begun to wake. Then, the lights turned on. A flicker at first. A few overhead bulbs struggled against the weight of time. Then, all at once, the entire underground facility blazed with artificial light. The machines lining the walls whirred to life, their once dead screens now glowing with unreadable symbols. The air changed, no longer heavy and stagnant, but charged with energy. Above ground, the ruins reacted. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows through the empty streets. Giant screens on the sides of buildings, once dark and lifeless, now glowed with static and fragmented images. Billboards, long covered in grime, now shone brightly with remnants of old messages. Power grids realigned themselves. Distant structures, hidden in the fog of decay, illuminated one by one, as if the city itself was waking up from a long sleep. The research team panicked. Their instruments detected a massive energy surge spreading across the planet. Systems that should have been non-functional after centuries of neglect were suddenly operational. Satellites in orbit, thought to be useless hunks of metal, began transmitting signals. Networks reconnected. Deep beneath the Earth, unseen mechanisms clicked into place. This was not a dead world. The Kelvar had assumed Earth was just another failed civilization, its people long gone, but they had misunderstood. The humans had not left behind ruins, they had left behind a system. A system designed to wait. The researchers scrambled to shut down the power, but it was beyond their control. Whatever the humans had built, it did not require their input. It had always been meant to activate on its own terms. They had simply arrived at the wrong time, or perhaps, the right time. The realization hit them like a shockwave. This was not an abandoned world. It was a world in hibernation. And now, it was awake. The lights continued to spread, reaching beyond the city, igniting structures that had been dark for untold centuries. And then, the final warning came. The ground rumbled beneath them. In the skies above, unseen satellites adjusted their trajectories. Across the planet, machinery long dormant began running calculations, data processed, decisions made, systems calibrated. The Kelvar had expected a dead world. What they had found was something else entirely. Humanity had not been wiped out. Humanity had been waiting. The alien research team arrived on Earth in the late hours of its long-forgotten day cycle. Their ships descended through a thick atmosphere of dust and stagnant air, settling on the cracked remains of what was once a major human city. Time had stripped away much of its former identity. Skyscrapers, now half-collapsed and covered in vines, jutted into the sky like broken teeth. The streets were empty, filled only with debris, rusted vehicles, and remnants of a species that had long since disappeared. To the scientists of the Kelvar Dominion, this was nothing more than another dead world, one of many across the galaxy. They had seen ruins like these before, civilizations that had risen and fallen, leaving behind only remnants of their existence. Earth was no different, just another stop in their endless pursuit of knowledge. They were here to study what little remained, cataloging data for their own archives before MO. They found the planet unimpressive. The ruins were crude compared to the towering spires and seamless technology of the Dominion. Human buildings, with their reliance on steel and concrete, were primitive in comparison to the self-repairing alloys and gravity-defying structures of the Kelvar. Their machines were ancient, their energy sources inefficient. Even their greatest cities seemed laughably simple, lacking the sophistication that the aliens expected from a species that had once reached for the stars. Their instruments detected no signs of life. Not even microbial organisms showed much activity. The planet had been silent for centuries, perhaps longer. They moved through the city with practiced efficiency, scanning buildings, retrieving data chips from corroded terminals, and recording their findings. Occasionally, they came across the remains of human technology, old generators, broken computers, fossilized electrical wiring. Each discovery was met with dismissal. This species was weak, their reports would later read. Their technology was fragile, their energy systems crude. Then they found the underground facility. The entrance had been buried under centuries of debris, but their scanners had detected a large chamber beneath one of the tallest structures in the city. Clearing the rubble was easy with their equipment, and soon they uncovered a metal door, rusted but intact. It led downward into a vast complex, deep beneath the earth, where the humans had once hidden something of importance. They entered cautiously, illuminating the darkness with the soft blue glow of their scanning devices. The chamber was large, stretching out in every direction. Massive pillars supported the ceiling, and rows of machinery lined the walls. The air was still. At the center of the room stood a massive console, covered in dust, its screens long since blackened with age. The aliens approached, their instruments humming as they began to analyze the systems. The design was archaic: wires, circuits, mechanical switches, all things long abandoned by the Dominion. They scoffed at the simplicity of it. Whatever the humans had built here, it was old, outdated. They assumed it had once been some sort of power grid or control center, a last attempt by a dying species to hold on to their world. But their scans showed no remaining power. It was dead, like everything else. But then, something changed. A soft hum, almost imperceptible at first, vibrated through the chamber. The air shifted. The scientists paused. Their instruments detected a sudden surge of energy, a flicker, faint but undeniable, deep within the facility's systems. They had triggered something. The change was rapid. The hum grew louder, turning into a steady vibration. The walls trembled, dust shaking loose from the ceiling. A mechanical whirring sound echoed through the chamber. One by one, the ancient machines powered on, as if awakening from a long sleep. Then the lights came on. First, a few flickering bulbs, dim and struggling, then a full cascade of illumination. The underground facility was suddenly bathed in harsh white light, revealing rows of inactive screens, forgotten terminals, and dormant machinery that had waited patiently in the dark. The energy readings spiked. The aliens scrambled to adjust their instruments, trying to understand what was happening. Across the ruined city above, more lights began to flicker on street lamps, interior lights, electronic billboards. The buildings, once dark and lifeless, began to glow. Something was still working. The Kelvar scientists had seen many dead worlds, but never had they seen a planet respond this way. Systems long abandoned should not reactivate so easily. Whatever the humans had built, it had not died. It had waited. And then the screens came to life. Massive displays that had once been dead now flickered with data, scrolling symbols and numbers across their surfaces. It was human code, a language long lost to time, but unmistakably structured. The screens displayed sequences of information, automated messages from a civilization that had vanished. More systems booted up, ancient satellites reconnected, transmitting signals to one another. Machines hidden beneath the city hummed as backup power grids realigned. Across the world, similar reactivations were taking place. Distant cities, long dead, were now responding in kind. The Dominion scientists stood frozen, their arrogance fading into unease. This was not the remnant of a species that had perished. This was a system, an intelligent, planned system designed to survive long after its creators had vanished. And now, they had turned it back on. The realization came slowly. The humans had not simply built cities. They had built something greater, an infrastructure designed to withstand time itself. And they had built it for a reason. The aliens had assumed humanity was extinct, a civilization lost to history. But now, as the world's long-dormant systems reawakened, one terrifying thought settled in their minds. If the power was still on, then what else might still be waiting? Far above them, hidden within the darkness of space, ancient human satellites adjusted their trajectories. Deep beneath the Earth, mechanisms that had not moved in centuries stirred. The planet had been silent for a long time,